Wei Zhuang, a picture of Jinling. Rain falls on the river in sheets. The grassy bank is lush. The 6 dynasties are like a dream. Birds call in the emptiness. Unmoved, willows hang over the terrace wall. As then, flowers like mist over the 10-mile dike. Okay, so we continue with the heptasyllabic quatrains, and this is the only poem in the collection by Wei Zhuang. Now, Wei Zhuang, very similar figure to some of the poets that we've been seeing of late, like Han Wo or Chang Tian. He was a very important late Tang poet, and his biography is the following one. He was born in 836 in Chang'an, and he was actually a 4th-generation descendant of one of the poets we've already encountered in the anthology of Wei Jingwu. And he took the Jinshi examinations many times, but took a long time to pass them. He failed a lot of times. And only in 894, when he was already 60 years old, did he manage to finally pass them. And he was appointed to some positions in the court. And one of the famous things he did was he presented a memorial in 900 in which he urged that several distinguished poets be posthumously awarded the Jinshi degree because they had deserved it but hadn't managed to get it during their lifetime. In 901, he was sent to Shu as where the military commander of the area, Wang Jian, made him a chief secretary. A few years later, after the collapse of the Tang, Wang Jian proclaimed himself emperor, and he appointed Wei Zhuang to high positions like vice minister of personnel, manager of affairs, grand counselor, and he spent the last of his years being the head of the Shu civil administration, dying in 910. So definitely the last great poet of the Tang. And a couple of things that Wei Zhuang is interesting for. So Wei Zhuang wrote a type of poetry that was mostly focused in what scholar officials, Confucians would probably depict as decadent, sensual poetry on love and on forlorn beauties and this sort of thing. That's the main type of poetry I think Wei Zhuang wrote. But he was actually, at least during his lifetime, he was very famous for writing a poem, The Lady of Qin, which is a pretty long poem, depicting the sack of Chang'an. I think the sack of Chang'an, yeah. And a pretty explicit and vivid poem with scenes of rape and murder and dead bodies all strewn around. A poem very similar to one that had been written 1,000 years before by Wang Zhen at the time of the fall of the Han Dynasty. Curiously enough, this poem was not, well, it was perceived as indecorous because such an explicit depiction of death and violence was unsavory, to say the least, to the Confucian officials. So this poem actually was reneged by Wei Zhuang, and it disappeared. It was not preserved in his collected works, except for 2 lines that were quoted somewhere, until the 20th century, when it was rediscovered in a cache of old manuscripts in Dunhuang. So now we can read it. And that's probably his most representative poem and the most appreciated one today. So the poem that we have to comment that we have just read, A Picture of Jinling, this is an interesting poem because this is an ekphrastic poem on a completely different topic from love and romance, and more connected to the political mishaps that Wei Zhuang managed to see. As we say, Wei Zhuang lived at the end of the Tang Dynasty. He saw the collapse. And this poem of his is about Jinling. Jinling, we've encountered it in the past. Jinling was the Tang name of what had been in the past called Jiangkan, and what would be called in the future Nanjing. Jinling had been the capital of the southern dynasties in the period of disunion, the Chinese dynasties being the ones ruled by Chinese rulers and not by barbarians, but weak, and culturally splendorous, but politically and militarily weak. And they had controlled the south. And well, when the last southern dynasty was annexed by the Shui, the capital, Yankan, was burned to the ground. It was reduced to ashes. Not a building was left standing. But during the Tang, in its whereabouts, because it was a very strategic position in the Yangtze River, Jinling it was rebuilt and now called Jinling. So this poem is written not with the it's a sight of Jinling, a picture of Jinling, like the title says, but it's not based on at least as far as I'm aware, on an actual visit of Wei Zhuang to the city. It's actually based on a painting. There was, or rather, a series of 6 paintings that Wei Zhuang contemplated when he wrote this poem, and they were depictions of the ancient city. Well, not so ancient because it was rebuilt, but there were 6 depictions of Jinling. So he composed this poem, and he might have even inscribed it in one of those said paintings. Now, it is said that Wei Zhuang appreciated the paintings because in them you can see they are painted in a way as to evoke the glorious but sad and tragic past that the city of Jinling had experienced. It became a bit like the memento mori or the ubi sunt trope of Western Latin literature, the great capital of the splendorous past that has disappeared and left not a trace. All the more so in classical Chinese society because, as opposed to Rome or Greece, where you can still see the ancient marble temples and the ruins. Chinese architecture is mainly wood, which means at the end of each dynasty and at the sacking of each capital, almost everything would be burnt to the ground and there would be no physical trace. In fact, the traces are literary. The connection, the knowledge that the scholar officials have of the past is textual. It's based on the texts that are preserved of the glorious past. Anyway, when he wrote this poem, it seems Wei Zhuang was also confronting another piece of art, in this case not a painting, but a text, a poem by a Gao Chan called Afternoon View of Jinling. And that poem had a line or something like, a piece of sadness can't be painted. And in a way, this poem by Wei Zhuang is an answer to that statement. It's a refutal, a rebuttal, saying that, some painters and some poets, obviously, like Wei Zhuang, can depict this sadness, this melancholy that is attached to a territory that was a glorious capital. Also, why would Wei Zhuang be interested in this topic? Well, it's pretty obvious. As we've said, he wrote a very famous long poem about the destruction of Chang'an. And Chinese poets, when they write about the past, a lot of the times they're writing about the present. So this picture of a fog of a disappeared great capital of the south is actually probably echoing as a picture of the destruction of the capitals of the Tang dynasty in Wei Zhuang's present. In fact, Chang'an, which had been an important city for many centuries or even millennia, would never again recover from the end of the Tang dynasty. From then onwards, it would never again be a capital of the empire. It would become a backwater provincial town, a pale shadow of what it used to be. Okay, let's take a look at the poem as we usually do, couplet by couplet. It's a very descriptive poem, which makes sense, bearing in mind that it's born out of an ekphrasis. Rain falls on the river in sheets. The grassy bank is slush. The 6 dynasties are like a dream. Birds call in the emptiness. So, as usually happens in Chinese poems, you have this parallelism, it's a contrastative parallelism between nature and culture. So, in this picture, you can see some natural phenomena that are pretty regular. So the rain is falling, the grass is growing. So the pretty regular scenes of spring and of the seasons. The grassy bank is slush, but this is a beautiful scene of renewal, which jars with the lack of renewal of civilization. So the seasons keep renewing themselves in Jiangling and in the painting of Jiangling, but the past has disappeared. So the 6 dynasties are like a dream. So they've left no traces. They feel as insubstantial as a dream. Yeah, and birds call in the emptiness. Probably there might be some birds painted in the picture, but actually Wei Zhuang is here immersing himself in the painting, imagining the birds calling in the emptiness because the city was, destroyed, the old city. It's only an empty husk of what it was, and probably, maybe the painting depicts the old side of Jinling without any buildings, or the ruins, whatever mounds or ruins might have remained of the period of the Six Dynasties. Second couplet. Unmoved, willows hang over the terrace wall. As then, flowers like mist over the 10-mile dike. So the second couplet juxtaposes elements of the past and of culture with elements of nature. So you have willows, that is trees, nature hanging over the terrace wall. So probably there was a terrace where the imperial palace or some important buildings were built upon, and you have the willows there. And then you have, this is also a spring scene, and probably there is a dike painted, where the rivers and dikes surround the capital. So in those old dikes that have survived, you also have flowers, because you have flowering trees on the banks, and that hasn't changed. So the reaction of nature to society is contrasted in these two lines. So in the third line, the willows are on the terrace, but they are unmoved. They just follow their cycles of nature. They're indifferent to the ruin that has fallen on the terrace wall and to the history associated with probably the ruins and the palaces that once presided the terrace wall, and the tragic stories of death and murder and usurpation and so on. So the willows are there. Don't know if the willows were not there in the beginning. Probably, maybe some of them were, but anyway, nature is indifferent to human history and suffering. And like then, so in spite of all the changes, nature does keep flowering again. So the flowers are like a mist over the 10-mile dike. In texts from the time, you would have read descriptions of the old southern capitals, banks, crowned with flowering trees and making for a lovely sight in spring. That sight is renewed. The past is gone, but spring and its flowers have come again, at least in the painting and probably in the physical surroundings of the rebuilt city. So there is hope in nature's renewal, perhaps not in humanity's renewal.